his last moment of control. Edward Sterling had built his life on a single principle: control. Every choice, every investment, every meticulously planned step had led him to an unimaginable level of success. He was a master of the game, a man who understood the dynamics of power and manipulated them with unmatched skill. But all of that shattered in an instant, the moment he saw her. In the lobby of a luxury resort, he found himself staring at his ex-wife, Clara, and the child she was holding in her arms. She was the perfect age. The resemblance was undeniable. A chilling realization settled in his heart. Had Clara been hiding a secret all these years? Had he unknowingly passed by his own daughter, completely unaware of her existence? If a story about second chances and the power of family resonates with you, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to bring you more stories like this. Edward wasn't the type to linger in the past. His entire existence revolved around progress, making decisions without a moment's hesitation, always conscious of what lay ahead. He had spent years mastering the art of control, building an empire through sheer determination and unwavering discipline. To those who saw him, he appeared to have it all. A thriving business worth millions, authority, influence, and the ability to walk into any room and command admiration. As he relaxed in the opulent lobby of the coastal retreat, cradling a glass of whiskey and letting the soft hum of conversation envelop him, an unexpected sensation began to settle in. The strange burden of fatigue. He'd come here under the pretense of seeking a rare respite, but deep down, he was acutely aware that his mind was already preoccupied with upcoming meetings, deals on the verge of closing, and phone calls waiting for his attention. He wasn't particularly skilled in the art of relaxation. He savored another sip, releasing a slow breath as his eyes drifted toward the entrance. It was at that moment he saw her. Initially, he believed his imagination was deceiving him. The figure who emerged from the revolving door bore an uncanny resemblance to a ghost from his history, a person he had made sure he would never encounter again. She glided in with a serene elegance, her dark brown hair flowing over her shoulders as she held a small child in her arms. The sight stirred a deep tension within him. Clara, for a brief moment, simply looked, struggling to comprehend the scene before him. She seemed almost unchanged from 3 years ago, still as beautiful and poised. But there was a subtle layer of weariness now etched into her features. Nothing could have prepared him for the shock of finding her here, in this unexpected setting, especially with the little girl she was holding. A little girl, perhaps only 3 years old, clung to Clara's neck, her face nestled into her mother's shoulder. Edward felt his fingers tighten around the glass he held. His heartbeat, once steady and controlled, now quickened with an inexplicable urgency. He hadn't seen Clara since their relationship came to an end. Their breakup unfolded without theatrics in a courtroom or unresolved disputes. She had left, and he had let her go, convincing himself it was the correct choice. He had immersed himself in his work, believing what they had once shared was merely a fleeting diversion. He had moved on, or so he told himself. Yet, seeing her now, accompanied by a child who appeared to be just a heartbeat away from the moment she had left his life, an unsettling chill settled in his stomach. Could this be his daughter? And if so, why did he feel a sickening certainty that he already had the answer? Clara moved toward the reception counter, adjusting the child in her arms as she spoke with the hotel staff. Edward barely noticed anything else in the room. The voices around him became insignificant, and the soft music floating from the speakers turned into mere background noise. His attention was completely consumed by the astonishing resemblance in the child's features. Even from a distance, an intense sense of urgency came over him, an instinct he had never experienced before. He felt compelled to have a conversation with her. He sought clarity. However, just as he contemplated his next move, just as he struggled to muster the strength to get up, Clara was already headed for the elevator, cradling the child tightly as she vanished behind the descending doors. Edward remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the emptiness left by her absence. The meticulously designed life he had established for himself had never felt more precarious. Edward barely slept that night. No matter how hard he tried to banish the sight of Clara and the child from his thoughts, it persisted, insisting on his attention. He had spent years mastering the skill of compartmentalization, meticulously guarding his emotions in pursuit of logic and control. Yet tonight, his thoughts were a tumultuous clash of questions, each without resolution. Did the child belong to her? It was as clear as day. The child's grip on her was unyielding, and the way Clara enveloped her in a protective embrace made it unmistakably clear. Yet the real question, the one that lingered in his mind, was the one he hesitated to be ready to face. Did she belong to him? A peculiar sense of panic coursed through him, an unfamiliar feeling he had never before experienced. If Clara had a child, their child, why had she kept it a secret? Did she genuinely think he wasn't worthy of knowing? Or perhaps she had assumed he wouldn't be affected at all. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the expansive windows of his suite, Edward had arrived at a resolution. He wouldn't allow himself to lose another moment in uncertainty. He sought the truth, and he was determined to uncover it. After a quick shower and a change into one of his meticulously tailored suits, he headed downstairs. He wasn't sure if Clara remained at the hotel, but a deep instinct within him suggested she was still here. She certainly wouldn't have come to a place like this for just one night. As he entered the restaurant, he scanned the room with a sharp eye. The resort was designed for the affluent, those who effortlessly afforded midweek getaways without a moment's hesitation. Yet Edward had no intention of looking at them. His gaze settled on a quaint table on the terrace, where Clara was seated with a little girl beside her. His heart quickened at the sight of them together in the sunlight. Clara looked as stunning as ever, her dark brown hair pulled back into a relaxed ponytail, exuding a natural grace in her demeanor. The little girl, if his memory served him right, was named Lily, as the receptionist had mentioned the night before. She sat quietly, her little legs swinging beneath the table as she nibbled on a piece of toast. It was the first moment Edward had genuinely observed her, and the sight sent a tight knot of unease into his stomach. Her eyes were a striking blue, unmistakably his blue eyes, a truth that could no longer be ignored. Taking a steadying breath, he moved forward, approaching their table with determination. Clara sensed his presence before he spoke a word, her body instinctively tensing, her fingers gripping her coffee cup with a newfound intensity. She shot a fleeting glance at Lily before looking back at him, her face a mask of ambiguity. "We need to have a conversation," Edward declared, maintaining a calm and measured tone. Clara paused, looking back at Lily before finally nodding her head. "Not here," she whispered. "Let's meet outside in 15 minutes. Edward gave a slight nod before turning and walking away, eager to avoid any unnecessary drama. His pulse throbbed in his ears, the emotions held tightly. Just beneath the surface, 15 minutes later, he found himself standing beside the serene garden terrace at the edge of the resort, his hands tucked into his pockets, staring out at the vast ocean. The tumultuous waves offered no solace to the tempest brewing within him. Suddenly, he became aware of footsteps following him. He looked and saw Clara standing there, her arms crossed, her demeanor cautious. Edward inhaled deeply, seeking to regain his composure. "Does she belong to me?" Edward asked. Clara flinched a little, her gaze igniting with an enigmatic spark. She let out a sigh. She looked down briefly before meeting his eyes. "Yes," she murmured softly. "She does belong to you." The ground felt unstable beneath his feet. It had been 3 years. For 3 years, he remained ignorant. As of this moment, everything about his life would change irrevocably. Edward stood motionless, his thoughts grappling with the profound impact of Clara's words. Her words were spoken with such simplicity and tranquility, yet the effect crashed over him like a powerful tsunami. Lily was his beloved daughter. His hands tightened in his pockets as he struggled to maintain a steady breath. A torrent of feelings surged within him. Shock, anger, disbelief. But beneath it all lay a deeper, more primal essence. He had a daughter, a fact that had completely escaped him. Clara fidgeted, her discomfort evident, as she braced herself for his response. Her arms remained crossed, a posture that suggested she was preparing herself for what might unfold next. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was soft, but the sharpness in it was unmistakable. Clara let out a quick sigh. Her fingers grazed her forehead as she finally met his eyes. "It wasn't supposed to be this way, Edward. I never intended to keep her from you. Yet the moment I discovered I was expecting, we were already falling apart. Your focus on work made you feel so far away. I wasn't sure how best to get in touch with you." His jaw tightened. "So you made the decision for me. You assumed I wouldn't be affected." Her eyes flashed with a hint of irritation. "I assumed you might feel a sense of duty, that you would shirk responsibility, not out of desire. I wanted to make sure Lily never felt like a burden while growing up." Edward let out a sardonic laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "You believed hiding her was the wisest choice?" Clara declared with conviction. "I believed I was protecting her, protecting our interests. The difficulty of that choice was immense. Yet at that moment, it seemed like the only option available to me." Edward ran a hand over his face, seeking to stabilize his thoughts. He had built his entire existence on reason, on mastery, while making deliberate choices. Yet this was an unforeseen circumstance he had never anticipated. "She's 3 years old," he finally murmured. His voice softened. 3 years of her life are gone. Time lost forever." Clara's face softened, and for the first time, a hint of regret flickered in her expression. "I know," she confessed, "and I won't attempt to rationalize it. Yet, Edward, I never intended to separate you from her indefinitely." He shot her a penetrating glance. "Then what kept you from getting in touch?" Clara paused, letting out a slow breath. "I was afraid that if I acted, you would claim her as your own." The words left him speechless. He looked at her, trying to grasp the meaning of her recent words. "I wouldn't have done that," he said. His voice was strained. Clara looked him in the eye, her face a canvas of inscrutable emotions. "You wouldn't have." Edward swallowed nervously. To tell the truth, he wasn't sure what actions he might have taken at that moment. He had been relentless in his journey, unyielding in his pursuit of accomplishment. Would he have fought for custody? Would he have tried to handle the situation like he handled every other aspect of his life? Perhaps Clara was right. Perhaps he wasn't the kind of person she could trust with something as delicate as a child. Yet he had transformed into someone entirely different. "I want to see her," he said finally, his voice unwavering. "I wish to better understand my daughter." Clara studied his expression intensely, contemplating the trustworthiness of his words. Then, gradually, she inclined her head in agreement. "All right," she responded softly. "However, we proceed according to Lily's preferences. She doesn't know you, Edward. You cannot simply walk into her world and anticipate that everything will align perfectly in an instant." He nodded, understanding evident in his expression. He expressed that he didn't anticipate that. "Yet I have no intention of leaving this time." Clara watched him intently, and for the first time, he noticed a shift in her expression. The fortified barriers remained, but a fissure had appeared, a thin crack in the midst of them. "Then we begin gently," she commented. Progress unfolds gradually. Edward nodded once more, his heart heavy with feelings he struggled to comprehend. For years, he had been convinced that he was alone, that the only mark he would leave on the world was the empire he had built. For the first time, he realized his mistakes, and he was determined to do whatever was necessary to reclaim the time he had wasted. Edward had always approached situations with confidence. He had orchestrated billion-dollar deals, faced off in boardrooms with the most formidable executives, and maneuvered through crises that would have shattered those of a weaker resolve. As he stood beside the hotel's garden terrace, a sense of anticipation coursed through him as he awaited the arrival of Clara with Lily, an unfamiliar feeling that coiled tightly in his chest. How do you introduce yourself to a daughter who had no knowledge of your existence? Clara had emphasized that this would unfold gradually, following Lily's pace. Edward grasped that concept. He didn't anticipate her rushing to embrace him or calling him Dad right away. But the significance of the moment still weighed heavily on him. 3 years had already slipped away. He was determined not to lose another moment. The soft sound of footsteps prompted him to look back. Clara approached him, her posture tense but firm, her eyes deep and inscrutable. And beside her, holding her hand tightly, was Lily. Edward's breath caught in his throat. She was tiny, barely coming up to Clara's waist. Her dark curls danced softly with each step, and those blue eyes, the ones that mirrored his own reflection each morning, gleamed with a serene curiosity. She held her mother's fingers tightly, uncertain in the unfamiliar circumstances surrounding her. Clara knelt beside her, her voice a gentle whisper. "Sweetheart, this is Edward. I consider him a friend." Edward experienced a sharp pang at hearing the word friend, but he remained composed. He grasped the reason behind Clara's words. Referring to him as her father directly might have felt too intense. Lily looked at him, her head tilting slightly, as if she were examining a puzzle that eluded her. She remained silent for a moment, simply staring at him, with those remarkably large eyes. Edward crouched down to her height, his movements deliberate and gentle. "Hello, Lily," he said softly. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Lily shifted a little, looking at Clara as if seeking reassurance. At her mother's nod, she finally found her voice. "Hello." It was just one word, diminutive and hesitant, but it brought a sense of tightness to Edward's chest. He offered a warm smile, seeking to calm her nerves. "I understand you have an affinity for puzzles. Is that really true?" Lily's eyes brightened with a hint of curiosity. She tilted her head in a measured and deliberate gesture. "I'm not particularly good at them," Edward confessed, maintaining an upbeat tone. "Perhaps you could share your knowledge with me." Lily shot another glance at Clara, gauging her reaction, to make sure everything was all right. After a brief pause, she nodded again. Edward let out a slow breath. He hadn't realized he was holding it in. It may have been small, but it marked the beginning. Clara stood up, her fingers gently sliding through Lily's curls. "Why don't we sit down?" she suggested, guiding them to a shaded spot where a small table and chairs awaited. Edward lingered behind, his thoughts still swirling from the weight of it all. Before him sat his daughter, her fingers idly toying with the hem of her dress as she shot him furtive, curious glances. Clara took a small coloring book from her purse along with a vibrant set of crayons, placing them in front of Lily. "Feel free to add some color to your masterpiece while we chat, okay?" Lily nodded. She opened the book and thoughtfully chose a blue crayon. Edward watched her intently for a moment before he decided to speak again. "What's your favorite color?" he asked. Lily kept her gaze down, but her response was soft. "Lavender," he smiled. "That's an excellent choice. It's a bold shade." Lily shot him another glance, holding it for a moment longer before turning her attention back to the page in front of her. Edward exhaled, adjusting his position in the chair. He had anticipated the awkwardness, but now that he found himself seated with her, he understood the magnitude of the effort he had ahead of him. Clara seemed to have an intuition about his thoughts, as she gently broke the silence. She tends to be reserved when she meets new people. Edward nodded slightly. That's perfectly fine. We will proceed at her pace. Lily became immersed in her coloring, while Edward seized the opportunity to observe her closely. The delicate contours of her face, the way she gnawed at her lip when she concentrated, and the soft curl of her fingers around the crayon. It felt almost dreamlike to realize that this tiny little girl belonged to him, that he had been absent for her first steps, her first words, and all those precious milestones parents cherish. Yet he was determined not to let anything else slip away from him. After a while, Lily paused her coloring and looked at him. What color do you like best? Edward smiled at the modest but meaningful moment. He expressed that he believed he now understood. Purple seems quite appealing. Lily looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, as if she found his answer satisfactory. Clara observed the exchange, a soft warmth spreading over her features. Edward understood that this was only the beginning. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Edward had never experienced time flowing with such a paradoxical rhythm, both slow and fast. The days after his initial encounter with Lily unfolded like a tightrope walk. Each exchange was meticulously measured, each moment imbued with a significance he had never anticipated. He had forged his professional career through assertiveness, by seizing opportunities, by ensuring that events unfolded exactly as he envisioned. Yet this wasn't a transaction. This was his daughter, and no plan could make up for the time that had slipped away. He and Clara had established a cautious rhythm. Each morning, he would join them for breakfast at the hotel restaurant, positioned across from Lily, while she nibbled on her toast with small, meticulous bites. She remained shy in his presence, uncertain of his role in her life, but she had begun to open up to him. Initially, it was the small gestures, furtive glances while he spoke, responding with a nod to his questions. She began to share small snippets of her day with him, mentioning the peculiar bird she had seen outside her hotel window, and her dislike for orange juice, which she found too sour. He clung to every word. One afternoon, as he and Clara rested on a shaded terrace, with Lily engrossed in her small set of toys at their feet, he finally mustered the courage to pose the question that had been gnawing at him since the moment he discovered the truth. "What brings you both here, Clara?" She averted her gaze from him initially. Her eyes remained fixed on Lily, watching as her daughter meticulously arranged small plastic cups into a tower. After a moment, she expressed that they needed a respite. Life at home has been challenging. Edward watched her closely, recognizing the tension in her shoulders. He had known Clara well enough to sense when she was concealing something. "Challenging? How?" he insisted. Clara let out a gentle sigh, finally directing her gaze toward him. "Lily has been asking about her father." Something within him contorted at that. "What did you tell her?" Clara paused, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Initially, I explained that families exist in various forms, with some children having both a mother and a father together, while others may not. However, she possesses a great intelligence, Edward. She kept asking relentlessly. She was curious to know if you existed, if you were even aware of her presence." Edward let out a breath, his gaze fixed on Lily, who remained engrossed in her tower. The realization that she had spent her brief existence thinking about him, seeking answers that remained elusive, caused an unexpected ache in his chest. "So you brought her here," he murmured softly. Clara subtly nodded. "I wasn't certain if our paths would cross, but a part of me secretly hoped that they would." Edward looked at her again, his expression a mystery, that left her intrigued. "Would you have ever told me?" Clara swallowed. Her fingers gripped the armrest of her chair with an escalating intensity. "I'm not certain," she confessed. "I had the desire to. I was on the verge of it on numerous occasions, but fear stopped me." Edward felt a conflict within himself. He hesitated to hear her reasons, but he understood the need to. What was there to be afraid of? His gaze fell to his hands. "Of me despising you, of you hating her, or of you trying to take her away from me?" Edward experienced a sudden surge of remorse. He had spent a significant portion of his life dedicated to the notion that control was synonymous with security, that power implied an absence of vulnerability. He had truly transformed into the kind of man Clara had feared would use his power against her. "I would have never done that." His voice was unwavering. Clara looked him in the eye, her deep eyes probing his. "I wish to believe that." During a prolonged silence, neither of them spoke a word. Years of silence stretched out endlessly between them. Countless thoughts remained unexpressed. Then Lily's tower toppled with a soft clatter, and she let out a faint sigh of disappointment. Edward knelt down, meticulously gathering the plastic cups and stacking them neatly once more. "Would you like to try again?" he asked. Lily looked up at him briefly before offering a subtle nod. She extended her delicate fingers, lightly brushing against his as she accepted the cup from his hand. It was an ordinary moment, but for Edward, it held a profound significance. Clara watched them, a soft warmth spreading across her face. Perhaps her fears at that moment were justified. Perhaps he wasn't fully prepared, but he was prepared at last, and he refused to lose another moment. Edward had always struggled with patience. His entire existence revolved around quick decisions, bold actions that left no room for hesitation. He was a person who set goals and achieved them, who always ensured that time wasn't wasted in silence. Yet he was beginning to understand that only through patience could he achieve what was truly significant. Lily was starting to trust him, but it was unfolding gradually, with caution at every step. She still sought Clara's reassurance whenever he spoke, still paused before responding to his questions. Yet she was gradually allowing him into her world. She permitted him to sit beside her at breakfast, keeping a respectful distance from her mother. She allowed him to assist her in selecting colors as she created in her sketchbook. She allowed him to hold the door open for her, exuding confidence as she passed through without a trace of hesitation. Though they were minor, Edward treasured them as triumphs. One afternoon, he stood outside the hotel garden patio, watching Lily as she knelt beside a row of flowers. She slid her fingers along the petals, whispering softly to herself, in a way that was beyond his hearing. Clara sat on a nearby bench, keeping a respectful distance, as she watched over Lily, with the gentle vigilance of a protective figure, attentive to her every action. Edward approached with deliberate slowness, ensuring he didn't startle Lily. "What are you doing?" he asked, maintaining an upbeat tone. Lily looked up at him briefly before turning her attention back to the flowers. "I'm talking to the bees," she said, with a matter-of-fact attitude. Edward arched an eyebrow. "Oh? What are they saying?" Lily pursed her lips, deep in contemplation. "Although they are busy and tend to keep their conversations brief, I feel like they appreciate the flowers." Edward knelt beside her, watching the delicate bees dance among the flowers. He had never paused to observe details like this before. His universe had been perpetually overwhelming, incessantly pressurized. Yet as he sat here with his daughter, the idea of slowing down felt less daunting. "Do you like flowers?" he asked. Lily nodded slightly. "Mommy says they bring people joy." Edward shot a sideways glance at Clara, who was watching them with an air of feigned disinterest. He looked at Lily. "She's right. They do indeed." Lily considered him for a moment. Then she pointed to a delicate, pale purple flower. "That one is my favorite." Edward smiled. "I remember you mentioned your fondness for purple." Lily looked at him, her expression one of astonishment, as if she hadn't anticipated that he would remember such a small detail. She remained silent, but a subtle change flickered across her face, a softer connotation emerging. Edward allowed the moment to extend between them, not pressing or rushing. Finally, Lily stood up, shaking her dress with a delicate movement. "I'm really hungry," she declared. Clara seized the moment to stand up. She nodded, suggesting they go inside. "Lunch is just around the corner." Edward paused for a moment before he began to speak. "How about we have lunch together?" Clara shot a silent glance at Lily, seeking her input. Lily tilted her head, thought, and then nodded. "Okay." It was a hesitant affirmation, lacking fervor, but it didn't reject the idea either. Edward viewed it as a step forward. As they walked in, a sense of calm came over Edward for the first time since he discovered the truth. Perhaps he had transformed from a mere stranger into something more meaningful. Maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to evolve into something greater. Edward was beginning to understand that trust wasn't a commodity he could simply command. It was a journey that needed to be undertaken, little by little, experience by experience. With Lily, each small triumph held a meaning. In the days that followed, their exchanges became increasingly fluid. She still had her moments of silence. She still paused occasionally before speaking to him, but the doubt in her gaze was diminishing. She released Clara's hand when he was near. She shortened the distance between them, no longer hesitant of his presence. One morning, he entered the breakfast room to see Lily already at their familiar table, a plate of pancakes awaiting her. Clara poured a cup of coffee, her demeanor reflecting a newfound sense of calm that had escaped her for days. Edward pulled out his chair and sat down, watching as Lily meticulously drizzled syrup over her pancakes. "Are they worth it?" he asked. Lily looked at him, her mind racing as she chewed. Then she slowly nodded. "Are they okay?" Edward gave a sly smile. "Just satisfactory." After a brief pause, she commented, "They'd be better with strawberries." Edward nodded with a grave expression. "I'll make a note of that for the future." Lily watched him intensely, as if she were weighing the sincerity of his words. In silence, she pushed her plate a fraction closer to him. "You can have some if you want." Edward felt a tightness in his chest. It was a seemingly small act, but coming from her, it held a meaning she probably didn't fully comprehend. He grabbed his fork, cut a delicate piece, and savored it. He commented that they weren't bad, but that he agreed with her. The strawberries might improve their quality. Lily offered a subtle, satisfied smile before turning her attention back to her breakfast. Clara, who had been watching the interaction in silence, shot Edward a knowing look. It marked the inaugural moment when Lily had chosen to share something with him, and they were both acutely aware of it. After their morning meal, they decided to stroll along the shore. The resort's secluded shore was quiet, with the waves gently caressing the sand. Lily ambled between them, her small hand sometimes reaching out to grasp Clara's as they walked. Edward watched her as she bent down to pick up a seashell, examining it closely in her hands, before holding it up for a better view. "This one is beautiful," she commented. Edward took it, examining it closely. "It is indeed. Do you like collecting seashells?" Lily nodded slightly. "Mommy says they're like little echoes from the sea." Edward handed the shell back to her. "In that case, it would be wise to save it." Lily paused briefly, then tucked it neatly into the pocket of her dress. In a surprising turn, she extended her hand and grabbed his, leaving him completely astonished. It was a delicate and fleeting connection, her tiny fingers encircling his for a brief moment, before she let go and ran off, her laughter echoing as the water danced around her feet. Edward stood motionless, a profound shift stirring within him. Clara, seated beside him, offered a soft smile. She whispered, "She's getting used to you." Edward let out a soft breath, his gaze fixed on Lily as she gracefully twirled along the shoreline. He confessed that he believed he was getting used to her as well. For the first time in his life, the allure of business, power, and success faded, revealing they were not the most meaningful pursuits after all. Indeed, she was. Edward had devoted his entire existence to the notion that success was quantified by numbers, revenue, mergers, market shares. Those were the foundations on which he had built his universe. Yet as he stood on the beach, watching Lily collect shells with an expression of pure joy, he realized that perhaps he had been wrong all along. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in a way that felt almost dreamlike. As they strolled along the shore, Lily would intermittently get ahead, eager to chase the waves, only to return moments later, excitedly showcasing another treasure she had unearthed from the sand. With each glance, her eyes reflected a growing confidence, as if she were gradually beginning to accept that he would remain by her side. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they had collected a modest assortment of shells, which Lily meticulously arranged on a wooden board next to the beach chairs. She sat cross-legged, carefully examining each item before categorizing them into distinct groups. Edward watched, captivated by her unwavering concentration at something so seemingly ordinary. Clara sat beside him, a soft breeze ruffling her dark hair as she shifted her gaze between them. "She has never experienced this before," she murmured softly. Edward looked at her, furrowing his brow. "What did you mean?" Clara paused, weighing her words with deliberation. "A paternal presence, a person who is committed and attentive, someone who looks at her with the same intensity you possess." Edward hesitated, struggling to find the right words to say in that moment. For years, he had persuaded himself that family was an unnecessary burden, that love and connections were mere distractions that would hinder his progress. Yet, looking at Lily in this moment, he was struck by a profound longing for all the moments that had slipped away from him. He finally admitted, "The past cannot be changed, yet I can exist in this moment, if you'll allow me." Clara looked at him, her expression a mystery that defied interpretation. "What happens when we leave this place?" Edward let out a breath, his fingers combed through his hair. He, too, had been contemplating that. Their stay at the resort seemed like an isolated refuge, a fleeting respite from the everyday world. Yet he hoped this wouldn't end when they vacated their hotel rooms. He expressed a desire for permanence. He wished to be a part of their lives, not just for a short period of time, not just as a remote presence she barely recognizes. He wished to take on the role of her father, to genuinely support her. Clara watched him intently for a prolonged moment before she finally spoke. "It signifies the importance of being present, Edward, not just during the calm moments, not just when it aligns with your schedule. She is not a transaction to be negotiated. She is a little girl in search of consistency, craving the security that those around her will remain steadfast." Edward inclined his head, his jaw tightening. "I am aware of that. I am determined to show you that I am capable of meeting her needs." Clara scrutinized his expression, and in that moment, he saw the last vestiges of her uncertainty vanish. "Then show me," she murmured. Just as he was about to respond, Lily walked over, grasping something tightly in her hands. She opened her delicate fingers, revealing a small, perfectly formed white shell. "This one has a unique meaning." Edward leaned in, carefully accepting the shell from her hand. "It's impressive," he commented. "What makes it unique?" Lily tilted her head, lost in thought. "Because it's the last one I discovered today. It feels like a lucky shell." Edward smiled, a warmth spreading through him, as he absorbed the purity in her words. "Then I believe we should keep it," he commented, as a reminder. Lily nodded enthusiastically. Without a moment's hesitation, she sat down in his lap, her head resting gently against his chest. Edward felt a sudden tightness in his chest. It marked the inaugural moment when she approached him independently, uninvited, and without the reassuring presence of Clara. The gesture was silent, yet it held an immense significance. Clara watched them, and as Edward's gaze met hers, he noticed a shift in her demeanor, something that resembled acceptance. For the first time in his life, Edward Sterling felt he had truly discovered something valuable to hold on to. This time, he was determined not to let it slip away. The elegance of this conclusion lies in its subtle, yet deeply moving, resolution. It is not about extravagant displays or theatrical proclamations. Instead, it centers on something far more profound: commitment, trust, and a gradual mending of connections. Edward Sterling begins this narrative as an individual who measures success through mastery and authority, convinced that emotional connections only act as hindrances. Ultimately, he discovers that genuine success transcends the confines of the boardroom. It revolves around what he cultivates in his personal life. The evolution of Lily's feelings toward Edward is what infuses this journey with so much power. Her hesitancy to fully accept him as her father adds a layer of authenticity to their trust. It unfolds in fleeting instances, allowing him to join her at the breakfast table, savoring her pancakes, extending her hand toward his with a sense of calm. The most poignant moment occurs when she voluntarily sits in his lap, leaning on him as if she has finally found someone she can trust. That solitary action holds a greater significance than any words that could be conveyed. He is now simply Dad. Clara's role holds significant importance as well. She transcends the role of a mere love interest. She embodies a mother, fiercely dedicated to safeguarding her child's well-being. Her hesitancy stems not from malice, but from a long history of doubt. She must understand that Edward is genuinely committed to remaining by their side, that he will not abandon her when challenges arise. When she finally urges him to show her, she is offering him the opportunity to become the father Lily truly deserves, rather than deciding that destiny for him. The sense of fulfillment in this ending stems from its deliberate pace, avoiding a rushed move toward a flawless resolution. Edward doesn't solve every problem in an instant, and the narrative doesn't conclude with an improbable fairy tale ending. Instead, it concludes with the assurance of something genuine: a father who is finally assuming responsibility, a mother who is beginning to regain her trust, and a little girl who is discovering that love can exist without conditions. This story unfolds around the theme of second chances, the pursuit of reclaiming lost moments, and the profound understanding that family transcends mere blood ties. It is about presence, about commitment, about the decision to embrace love, even in difficult times. Ultimately, Edward discovers more than just a daughter. He discovers something infinitely more precious. He discovers a meaning that no level of wealth or achievement could ever substitute. What do you believe Edward should have done when he first discovered the truth? If you were Clara, would you have made the same decision to conceal Lily? Share your opinions in the comments below. If this story of redemption and family love moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that second chances are possible.